The Austin Allegro is a small family car manufactured by British Leyland under the Austin name from 1973 until 1982. The same vehicle was built in Italy by Innocenti between 1974 and 1975 and sold as the Innocenti Regent. In total, 642,350 Austin Allegros were produced during its 10-year production life, most of which were sold on the home market. Design: the Allegro was designed as the replacement for the popular Austin 1100 and 1300 models, designed by Sir Alexis Agonis. As with the Morris Marina, the car can be seen with hindsight as symptomatic of the enormous difficulties facing British Leyland during that period. The key factor that British Leyland can now be seen to have missed is that a much more useful and popular form of car, the hatchback, was emerging in Europe, with designs such as the Autobianchi A112, Renault 16, and Volkswagen Golf. This configuration would go on to dominate the market for small family cars in the space of a few years. British Leyland stuck to the more traditional and less versatile booted design when they launched the Allegro. This was because of internal company politics. It had been decided that the Austin Mark-C should have a hatchback as its unique selling point, and that no other car in the company's lineup was allowed one. This decision hamstrung both the Allegro and the Princess, both designs naturally suited to a hatchback yet not given one. The Allegro used front-wheel drive, using the familiar A-series engine with a sump-mounted transmission. The higher specification models used the SOHC E-series engine, in 1500 cc and 1750 cc displacements. The two-box saloon body shell was suspended using the new Hydrogas system. Stylistically, it went against the sharp-edged styling cues that were becoming fashionable, and featured rounded panel work. The original styling proposal, by Harris Mann, had the same sleek, wedge-like shape of the Princess, but because British Leyland management, keen to control costs, wanted to install the existing E-series engine and bulky heating system from the Marina, it became impossible to incorporate the low bonnet line as envisaged. The body shell began to look more and more bloated and tubby. This was acceptable to BL, however, which according to Jeff Daniels' book British Leyland, The Truth About the Cars, published in 1980, wanted to follow the Citroën approach of combining advanced technology with styling that eschewed mainstream trends in order to create long-lasting timeless models. Its unfashionable shape was thus not a problem to them. The final car bore little resemblance to Mann's original concept that had originally been conceived as an 1100/1300 reskin. This, as well as British Leyland's faith in it as a model that would help turn the company around, led to it earning the early nickname of the Flying Pig. With the Allegro, the makers avoided the full extent of badge engineering that had defined the marketing of its predecessor, but they nevertheless introduced in September 1974 an upmarket Allegro, branded as the Vanden Plas 1500/Automatic. This featured a prominent grille at the front and an interior enhanced by a range of modifications designed to attract traditionally inclined customers, including special seats upholstered in real leather, with reclining backrests, deep pile carpets, extra sound insulation, a new instrument panel and walnut folding tables for the rear passengers, nylon headlining, and for the luggage, a fully trimmed boot trunk. In 1974, a time when the UK starting price for the Austin Allegro was given as £1,159, BLMC were quoting, at launch, a list price of £1,951 for the Vanden Plas 1500. The Allegro name was not used on this version. Early Allegro models featured a Cortex steering wheel, which was rectangular with rounded sides. This was touted as allowing extra room between the base of the steering wheel and the driver's legs. The Cortex wheel did not take off, and was dropped in 1974 when the SS model was replaced by the HL. The VP 1500 was never introduced with one, despite it being featured in the owner's manual. Despite this feature only having appeared on certain models for a limited time, the Allegro has always been associated with the criticism that it had a square steering wheel. In April 1975 a three-door estate car version was added to the range. Allegros were now coming off the production line with the same conventional steering wheel as the Morris Marina, although the company waited till early June 1975 to announce, rather quietly, the demise of the Allegros Cortex steering wheel, presumably to give time for older cars to emerge from the sales and distribution network. Similar to the two-door saloon, the Allegro estate featured a rear wash wipe and coach line like the saloon models. The spare wheel was housed under the rear load floor area. It was only in production for about 100 days before the arrival of the Series 2 model, making Series I Allegro estate rarer than most other models in the range. There was a similar situation in New Zealand, where the New Zealand Motor Corporation, which at the time had CKD kit assembly plants in Newmarket and Panmure, Auckland, and Patan, Wellington, began Allegro assembly in 1975 with the circular steering wheel. Only a few hundred Mark I's among the first locally built car models to have a factory-fitted heated rear window were built before the Mark II was launched. Most Allegros sold in New Zealand had the 1300cc's A-Series OHV engine and 4-speed manual gearbox. Later, the 1.5-litre OHC engine was offered with a 4-speed automatic box, but this was eventually dropped. NZMC, moving away from UK-sourced cars to models from its Honda franchise, later rationalised Allegro output to offer just two paint colours, metallic brown or solid dark blue, with a cream vinyl roof and brown interior trim. One batch of 48 Mark III CKD kits was shipped from England after NZMC had decided to drop the Allegro in 1980, and these were assembled and sold also in brown or cream. These rare cars have 4 round headlights rather than 2 square units, and different tail lights, plus a restyled dashboard. Dimensions: overall length, 3852 mm, overall width, 1613 mm, height, 1398 mm, wheelbase, 2442 mm, track, 1346 mm, weight, 869 kg, tire size, 145x13, range. Allegro 2, launched in time for the London Motor Show in October 1975, the Allegro 2 had the same body shells but featured a new grille, reversing lights on most models and some interior changes to increase rear seat room. The estate gained a new coach line running over the wing top lip and window edges. Changes were also made to the suspension, braking, engine mounts and drive shafts. At the end of 1976, British Leyland confirmed that they were holding exploratory talks with trades union representatives concerning the possible transfer of Allegro production from Longbridge to the company's plant at Senef in Belgium. The Belgian plant was already assembling the cars for continental European markets using CKD kits shipped from the UK. The stated objective of the transfer was to free up capacity at Longbridge for the manufacture of the forthcoming AD088 Mini replacement. In the event, the AD088 project was abandoned and the eventual Mini replacement, the less ambitiously engineered Austin Metro, did not reach the marketplace for another 4 years. Whether for reasons of politics or of customer demand or of cost, at a time of rapid currency realignment, Allegros for the UK market continued to be manufactured in the UK. The Belgian plant was closed in the early 1980s, by which time Allegro demand in continental Europe had faltered and BLMC's Austin Morris division clearly had more production capacity than product demand. Some models of Allegro 2 made for non-UK markets were equipped with 4 round headlights, rather than the usual 2 rectangular units. Range: Allegro 3. The Allegro 3, introduced at the end of 1979, used the A+ version of the 1.0-litre A-Series engine, and featured some cosmetic alterations in an attempt to keep the momentum going, but by then the Allegro was outdated, competing against the relatively high-tech Ford Escort Mark III and Vauxhall Astra, both launched within a year of the Allegro's facelift. British Leyland entered the small hatchback market pioneered during the 1970s by the likes of the Renault 5 and Volkswagen Polo with its Metro, which was launched in October 1980. The Metro would be built at the Longbridge plant, which had just been expanded to provide adequate production for the new car. But with BL hoping to sell more than 100,000 Metros a year in Britain alone, More capacity for production was needed and production of the Allegro and the Mini were pruned back as a result. After 1980, it failed to feature in the top 10 best-selling new cars in Britain, barely a decade since its predecessor had been Britain's most popular new car, though this fall in sales was compensated by the large sales figures achieved by the smaller Metro, as well as the fact that the slightly larger Triumph Acclaim was among Britain's top 10 selling cars by 1982. The Vanden Plas models were rebranded as the 1.5 and the 1.7, the 1.5 having a twin carburetor 1500cc engine and a manual gearbox, while the 1.7 had a single carburetor 1750cc engine and an automatic gearbox. Some models of Allegro 3 were equipped with 4 round headlights, rather than the more usual 2 rectangular ones. Allegro production, which had lasted for nearly a decade, finally finished in March 1982. Its successor, the Austin Maestro, went into production the following winter and was officially launched on March 1, 1983. Range. Reputation. The car was somewhat underdeveloped at the time of its launch, and a number of design flaws plagued the early models. Most of these were fixed in the Allegro 2 edition of the car, launched in 1975. In spite of all of this bad press, the Allegro was still a very popular car. As late as 1979, 6 years after its launch, it was the 5th best-selling new car in Britain, although sales were falling by the time it was replaced by the Maestro in March 1983. In certain overseas markets it is not uncommon to see Allegro still in daily use. Sales in its final years were disappointing, and by 1981 it had fallen out of the top 10 as more buyers were choosing 2 newer BL products, the similar-sized and more viable Triumph Acclaim, and the smaller Austin Metro. In a July 2008 poll conducted by The Sun, the Austin Allegro was named the worst British car ever made. In his book Crap Cars, writer Richard Porter says the only bit of the Allegro they got even vaguely right was the rust-proofing. The Allegro was placed second worst in his list, beaten only by the VW Beetle. Despite this, the Allegro picked up a reputation for rust problems during its life. This was probably due to association with many other cars of the period which had poor rust-proofing. An early edition of What Car? Ran a feature on the then-new Allegro, including an interview with staff at a BL dealership, who were asked if any problems occurred with the car in service. They replied that the car suffered from rust problems to its rear subframe. However, the staff thought they were being asked about the 1100/1300 car, which had been out of production for 5 years. Nonetheless, the magazine went on to report on the Allegro's non-existent rust problems, creating a serious image problem. The poor reputation of the car and the inefficient production and management techniques in British Leyland at the time at which it was produced have meant that the Austin Allegro has become associated with waste, inefficiency and poor quality. In Clarkson's Car Years, Jeremy Clarkson compares the Austin Allegro to the Morris Marina. He concludes the Allegro was a better car than the Marina, because the Allegro was a horrible car in a more original way than the Marina. In 2007, Sir Digby Jones, in criticising the inefficiencies of the Learning and Skills Council, said, "It is what I call the British Leyland Model Euro. You put a lot of money in at the top, and an Austin Allegro comes out at the bottom." In February 2006 it was reported that more than 1,000 Allegros sold in Britain were still registered with the DVLA, a better survival rate than the more popular Morris Marina, most of which were dismantled for parts that were interchangeable with other British Leyland cars such as the MGB, Mini and Morris Minor. Engines, 1973 a Euro 75, 1098 a CCA Series Straight 4, 49 a BHP at 5250 rpm and 60 a LBAFT at 2450 rpm, 1975 a Euro 80, 1098 a CCA Series Straight 4, 45 a BHP at 5250 rpm and 55 a LBAFT at 2900 rpm, 1973 a Euro 80, 1275 a CCA Series Straight 4, 59 a BHP at 5300 rpm, and 69 a LBAFT at 3000 rpm, 1980 a Euro 82, 998 a plus a CCA plus Straight 4, 44 bhp at 5250 rpm and 52 lbaft at 3000 rpm, 1980 Euro 82, 1275 cca plus straight 4, 62 bhp at 5600 rpm and 72 lbaft at 3200 rpm, 1973 Euro 82, 1485 cce. Series straight 4, 69 bhp at 5600 rpm and 83 lbaft at 3200 rpm, 1973 Euro 82, 1748 cce. Series straight 4, 76 bhp at 5000 rpm and 104 lbaft at 3100 rpm, 1974 Euro 1748 cce. Series twin carburetted straight 4, 90 bhp at 5000 rpm and 104 lbaft at 3100 rpm. References. External links: Austin Allegro development history, https://www.facebook.com/Austin Allegro/